Well, good morning again. I'm in a very strange situation of actually introducing myself. Excellent. What a good idea. So I'll introduce myself and my colleague, and then we'll begin. My name is Simon Thomson, and my colleague here is Jackie Sheridan-Ross. We were involved in a project as part of a wider pilot project in the UK, where it was about £5 million worth of funding last year for projects across the UK, both in institutions and in subject strand areas, and individuals to explore open education resources and the type of impact that they may have. There's now a second stream of funding of about £4 million which has been provided, and there's a new tranche of projects that are looking at cascading that experience down further amongst higher education institutions. And this is just our experience of that and the development of a model of implementation of OER at our institution in a way that we consider to be sustainable. So we started out by considering what the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development considered to be sustainable considerations when looking at OER implementation. The first one is looking at the size of your operation or your organisation and how you're going to manage or scale that sustainability up. The next part is about how your institution works. Is it an institution that's top-down? Does it have a grassroots approach? Or is it a mixture of both? So the development between institution and community. And also then the level of integration that you're trying to achieve. Whether you're looking at users in the production process, co-producers or producer-consumer models. And we very much saw that in order to be able to facilitate sustainability, that our staff would need to be producer-consumers. We saw OER as not just pushing out content, which was the initial part of the idea in the project, but also to be consumers of that. So there's three main aims relating to that. These are the things that we set out to try and achieve. We had a very cyclical approach to the project. We adapted it a number of times. We were very fortunate in the fact that the project funding allowed us to do that we were able to change our approach quite often, as long as the manager of the project would be happy for us to do that. So we wanted to engage a range of staff, so we weren't just looking at front-facing teachers. We were trying to engage professors, all levels of staff within the institution. We wanted a workable model, initially workable for Leeds Metropolitan University, but also hopefully workable for other people. And we wanted to begin that process of changing culture and practice. The hardest part of any revolution, if OER is a revolution, is actually to change the culture and practice within that. So we started out by engaging staff, building awareness, looking at reward and recognition. We felt that rewarding staff for the engagement was an important part of the project, and also then developing them and sustaining that development long after the project funding was completed. So we set out to look at what staff already knew, and we looked to seem as if we were in quite a beneficial position in terms of that most staff had heard of open education resources. This is a sample of about 120 staff. We've got 1,100 full-time staff, so roughly just over 10% sample. And people had heard OER. It had been bandied around the institution for a while, but actually what we were trying to do was now make them fully aware of it so they understood it. And you can see there that most of them understand that they're available, but they're not really sure where to find them or how to submit their own material. So that was our starting point. We then looked at fulfilling the requirement of reward and recognition. We believe that reward and recognition is something that helps encourage staff to engage in OER. It's all very well starting out with those volunteers, the goodwill of all those people, but if you want sustainability, you're going to have to find a way of encouraging the other members. So there's a number of models. One is to pay them. Is money the only option? Is there an appropriate model for financial gain for members of staff to be paid? Is it ethical that we pay staff to produce open educational resources? So we focused the project on volunteering initially. but we needed to find a way of, engaging people long beyond that. The next way of getting to people is a sense of personal value. I'm doing something good for the community. I feel good by giving away things for free, but that only lasts so long. There's only so many charitable adverts that you can take on television before you start to feel, not guilty anymore, but just fed up of that. So we started to think that maybe, it's enough for some. Of course it is. And there was a number of staff actually that, especially retiring professors, that actually wanted to leave material as part of a legacy. So that came out of our study, was that, staff that were leaving, that had all this work they built up, this teaching material, were happy to give it away as a legacy. I'm leaving, have my material. So that was one approach that came out of the project that we're hopefully going to continue to build on. So we looked at tying the idea of reward and recognition as well into staff development. The idea that we have a culture of staff development within the institution, and there's a number of models that works around. One is individual development, person to person, school-wide or group-wide, and then the faculty or the institution-wide is bigger. So we looked at a number of models, and we tried to engage in some respect on nearly all of those models. If somebody wanted some individual support, we would try and facilitate that. And we have quite a big culture of staff development, so we already have the mechanisms where we can provide that system. And more importantly, we wanted staff to feel that they could earn something from being involved in open education resources. And like many institutions, many of our staff are reviewed annually, and that review has now become a much more formal process at Leeds Metropolitan University. Each academic member of staff, in fact every member of staff of the institution, has what's called an annual performance development review with their line manager. And as part of that annual development review, they're required to list up to 6 what we call SMART objectives. They must be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. It takes a good few hours to fill the form in, believe me. But what we were finding was that by introducing OER as a SMART objective for academic staff, it was actually, they felt it was enabling them to, because sometimes performance development reviews is about, oh crikey, what can I put down this year? So it was almost, oh brilliant, you've come up with something for us to put on our performance development review. I'm going to release 5 hours of OER. And our OER were very much granular based, so we weren't talking about open courseware model here. We're talking about a very granular resource based infrastructure to support teachers, in sessions. So staff went, oh brilliant, I can do that. I've already got material that I'm creating, a little bit of extra effort sometimes to repurpose it and check out the copyright, but then brilliant, I've got a SMART objective that I can tick off. So that was the first stage of developing a reward and recognition program. The next stage was then to talk to our national bodies about that, and working with colleagues on other projects like Suzanne that worked on the MEDEF project. She spoke about some of that yesterday. Working with other colleagues across other institutions to push people like the Higher Education Academy that run a fellowship scheme for all professional HE lecturers in the UK to be accredited by, then we can basically say that when people apply for HEA fellowships, they're going to begin to be able to list evidence of OER contribution as part of that fellowship application. So those little things of getting recognition by the Higher Education Academy that rewarding staff for engagement in OER as part of a fellowship scheme is really beginning to build momentum. And hopefully by the end of this year, they will have started to put inside the process for applying for fellowships clear indicators that OER is an acceptable form of evidence for fellowship application. The next step for us was to develop the sustainable model. So we've looked at staff, how we can try and engage staff, but we needed to convince the institution, the institution as it's in its entire entity is difficult, to get into. And I was by no means in a position where I could make decisions that I could influence policy like that. So I had to find ways that we could take the project and make it successful within an institutional setting. So we basically benchmarked our achievable outcomes against what current systems we had within the institution. It was very important that after the funded process of the project, which is to get the ball rolling, that we didn't have to continue that level of funding again after the 12 months. So we had to fit within established systems, it had to be financially achievable, and it had to work within our existing networks, not just our technical networks, but also within our collaborative teaching and learning networks that we have, the people-to-people networks, and it had to fit all those remits. We developed a model to engage staff, to get them to think about, this is the unicycle bit, in case you weren't sure. The idea that, the repository is where you sit, everyone sits on the repository. We can all access a repository, a virtual learning environment. And from that, you got the recycle to deposit, retrieve, and reuse that material. So that's the cycle that we gave to staff. We then had to look at how we were going to build this around engaging faculties. So we set the project out to become a central OER support unit, a place where we would pull all the information together, and then we would push that out. So each of these purple circles represent each faculty within the institution. So we initially part-funded for somebody from each faculty to work with us on the Open Education Resource Project. So those 6 faculties agreed to release some staff time for payment in the outset of the project. And this is the role that those coordinators had. They were required to manage the content locally. We didn't have the resource to build a central quality control model where everything came to one place, everything was checked in that one place, and then it was output to the repository. What we did do is we asked them to oversee quality based on their academic judgments, based on the fact that they were best placed because they teach those subjects to make those decisions about whether the quality was suitable enough. Not somebody that sits outside of that subject that is assessing whether the picture looks nice, whether it's the right resolution, but whether they felt academically it was correct. They also had to cascade IPR advice and support, coordinate workshops that we would facilitate, raise awareness within their local staff groups, submit content to the repository, liaise with the central OER team, and feedback on that process. So each of these faculties was giving us a different experience. And that's what we found about our model, is that because we're not driving everyone to do exactly the same thing or exactly the same way, you tend to get much more engagement, or we certainly did. So that's that model there. Then the idea was that we would pull in resources from all around the institution. So we would pull in from our technology-enhanced learning teams at the top, our assessment learning and teaching teams, our Office of the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Assessment Learning and Teaching. We've already got a copyright clearance office. I don't want to make another one. There's one there that provides copyright support. And we also had a repository of research that was already there. So we just needed to use all those resources, but badge them as OER. We would then push out information to the faculty areas, guidance and support. We would start to influence policy and creation, develop reward and recognition, and staff development as well. And the key to most of this was about, encouraging some senior level buy-in and engaging staff in a staff development program. Now, when the project finished, we had to find a way of keeping that support mechanism going because the money was going. So what we did was the technology enhanced learning and the assessment learning and teaching teams, they took over that role. So the project's finished, they now have taken over that role of coordinating the OER support system within the institution. And we had, the same issues that everyone else has. How do you manage things like quality control? It's if you create this disparate model, it's very difficult to manage the quality. But we got the faculties to take ownership and responsibility for that. And they were happy to do that. They felt if they wanted to engage in OER, then they were happy to manage their quality. We also, the big C, the copyright issue, we had to provide them with resources and staff development information. And we had a big challenge with IPR. We identified very early on, we did a survey of, again, about 120 staff, And look, nearly 60% admitted that they were just getting their pictures and resources straight from Google. And I don't think that's unique to our institution. We've just been very open and honest about it. So we had to find ways of developing that. And we ran a number of workshops, a lot of workshops, building staff. And what we've started to do is build those workshops as part of an induction process. So that staff induction is about understanding about managing IPR and showing them where to get stuff from. That's all they need to know. We then have a deposit model, and I'm just going to quickly go through this to give you an impression of what we did. The people at the top are the academics. The next people down are the faculty. So the academics gave their material to the faculty representatives, and only 2 of those faculty representatives as part of this project actually put it directly in the repository. There was still a lot of caution. They still didn't want to be, responsible for it. So, unfortunately, during the project, 4 of those faculties actually went, and Jackie did all of the work, working with those 4 people and putting all that content into the repository. But that's not the model that was sustainable for us. Now, fortunately, the faculties have amalgamated. There's only 4 now. So hopefully the 2 that are working were fine. And then we had other areas of the institution as well providing resource. Our media services team that went to film lecture programs, they provided resource, and our skills for learning team at the same time. That's the model we want, and we're nearly there. Every faculty pushing the content directly into the repository is very important. A longer term model might be this, where we actually, if we're confident enough, we let academics drop the content directly into the repository, but, convincing the institution to do that is very difficult. So the final part in the last few minutes is just talking about the cultural change. How have we got there, and have we managed to change culture? And yes, we have started to change. At the end of the project, we surveyed a similar number, 120 members, and you can see that 100% saw value in using OER. So we had started to make that change. We've even started to make that change at a very significant higher level area of the university. These discussions were now taking place at academic board. And a paper is going to academic board next week to formally implement Leeds Met's OER strategy. Once it's there, it means that faculties must engage with it as part of a wider assessment, learning and teaching programme. And that was born out of the project. So that cultural change is coming. So, I can imagine the discussions they had at academic board. I know the discussions I've had with our commercial services. Why are you giving it away for free? I said, well, you show me an example where you've ever sold any teaching and learning resources. And they couldn't. The only thing that we do is provide teaching and learning, in the public sector. So they can't show individual resources where they've sold them and made a huge amount of money. And then we've practical support for staff. I have 20 copies of this booklet to give out today. And this is what we're doing, is supporting staff in their day-to-day endeavours to use OER. There's also a PDF and text version available as well. And if you want to visit our repository, you can certainly do that. And finally, this is the quote that I just absolutely loved from a development workshop that I did in September. When you show staff what's there, they go, I can really use this for free. And that's the caveat, that's the thing. I don't have to make it myself anymore. I'm not very good at making things, they say, so these are the things that we're using as the caveat to bring staff in. And thank you very much. Yeah, that's fine. So if anyone has any questions for myself.
I was wondering whether you had any positive, you mentioned change of culture when you surveyed people, but did any faculty say if they've changed their own teaching practices that may help, if this process made them reflect a bit more about their teaching practice, if they saw any impact within, the classroom, with the students, whether they engage students in doing anything, producing any materials, if you have data on that.
Well, the project report, which is available on the URL at the very bottom, has some data, some examples of where staff feel that it has benefited the quality of the teaching and learning by using open education resources. But, that is a whole other study in itself, being able to measure that. But, that data of staff comment and the fact that I'm not going to completely directly attribute it, but our NSS survey, our National Student Survey results, increased over the same period that staff began to use open education resources. And I can't possibly connect those two together. But, it'd be nice to think that by using open education resources, staff are able to improve the quality of teaching and learning provision. And one of the things that I'm trying to get established is that, academics think of themselves, instead of creators of content, designers of learning. So that means that they can use a wide range of resources to design a great learning experience. Most academics create all their own content still.
They do design, they do recreate. That happens. Whether it's open or not, it's another issue.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't open, or it's open within the DLE, but you do repurpose your colleagues' materials anyway.
Yeah, and they repurpose it from Google, so the idea is that we want to create a sustainable, long-term, open education resource model.
You mentioned that at the moment, the model you have is that faculties upload the content into the repository, and that the ideal model, in your view, would be for the academics themselves to upload their own content.
Yeah.
But then you said that it's perhaps a bit difficult for the university to approve that. What are the reasons?
I think because OER, for anybody that's engaged in OER, it's all about risk management. And, there are going to be times where the IPR is not completely checked and something goes awry, but we have a takedown policy. And that's all you can do is say, this is our policy. If you find something that you think shouldn't be up there, tell us and we'll take it down immediately. Because to try and say you're going to get 100%, IPR copyright protection is impossible. So it's risk management. And if you use a faculty structure whereby there's a number of people engaged in the process, you're reducing that risk. And just allowing academics just to put things on the open repository is a bit, at the moment, pushing the boundaries too far for the institution.
Hello, Megan. I know quite a bit about the project, and one of the things that you didn't mention, which I think is very, it seemed like a really good prospect to me, was to use the same repository for depositing research as for depositing open education resources, so they're not sort of two learning curves to climb. Could you just say whether academics are trusted to deposit their research into their individually? Because there are risks in that as well.
Yeah. I know the next speaker is up there. Do you want to come down and then this will be the last question? The only reason that we did that was because we already had a purchase system. We already had a system that the university had paid for that was a repository, and we didn't want to buy another one just for OER. Now, that research is held under a different license. Now, staff do put the research in there. It is publicly accessible, but it's completely copyrighted to the university. So there's a difference there in the fact that the model for access and use is different. So yes, staff do put the research up there because it's important as part of the research framework within the UK that we identify the research that we're doing and make that publicly available. But obviously the regulations that comply to access and use are completely different.